I gave my son everything, sold my land, emptied my savings, paid every bill for the house he bragged was his. Then one night, my phone buzzed with a message that cut deeper than any knife. You weren't invited to dinner. My wife doesn't want you there. But it wasn't her words. It was his. My own blood. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I quietly opened my laptop, stared at the 174 receipts of sacrifices he thought I'd never count, and pressed delete. He thought I'd keep giving forever. What he didn't know, I was just getting started. I was 28 when I buried my husband. A car accident on an icy road left me alone with a boy who was barely 5 years old, and from that day forward, everything I did was for him. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 62 years old, and for most of my life, I wore the title of Michael's mother more proudly than any other. There was no choice but to work, 2 jobs at first, then 3 when the bills stacked up like bricks on my back. During the day, I served tables at a diner. At night, I cleaned offices, and every Saturday, I stitched clothes for a local shop. Sleep was short, but watching Michael grow, watching him smile, that was the only rest I needed. Michael was bright, the kind of child teachers whispered about with pride. He wanted shoes that matched the other boys, and I went without new coats for 3 winters to make sure he got them. He dreamed of joining the school band, and I pawned my wedding ring for a second-hand trumpet. I remember the way his eyes lit up when he first touched the instrument. He didn't know what I'd given up, but I told myself that was the point. A mother sacrifices quietly. Years passed, and Michael became my reason for everything. When he graduated high school, I sat in the bleachers clutching a bouquet I couldn't afford, tears soaking into the petals. I thought, maybe now he will see. Maybe now he will understand what it took to get him here. But sons rarely see until much later, if they see at all. When Michael got married, I wore a navy dress I'd sewn myself. I smiled through the entire ceremony, pretending I didn't notice how his new in-laws treated me as if I were invisible, like a servant who had outlived her usefulness. Still, I told myself it was worth it. Marriage would give him stability, the kind of life I never had. Then came the house. Michael wanted a forever home. He spoke of it like it was destiny. A place where his children would one day run barefoot in the yard, where laughter would spill from the windows. But the loan officers weren't generous, and Michael confessed late one night that they needed more money for the down payment. He didn't have to ask. I already knew what he wanted. The land my father left me, a quiet piece of Ohio soil with apple trees that bloomed white every spring, was all I had left of my parents. I sold it. Signed the papers with a hand that trembled but didn't hesitate. The money went straight into Michael's new house, a 2-story with shutters he said reminded him of childhood fairy tales. "Mom, you don't know what this means to us," he told me, hugging me tightly the day we closed. For a moment, I believed he truly meant it. I believed this house was not only his dream, but also my safety net. The place where I would finally rest after decades of toil. In my heart, I thought, this is my investment. Not just in bricks and wood, but in love, in loyalty, in the promise that my son would never leave me behind. I moved into the guest room a week later. It was small but cozy, painted a pale yellow with lace curtains I had sewn myself. I filled it with framed photographs of Michael as a child. His first day of kindergarten, his high school prom, the trumpet in his hands. Each picture was a reminder of the road we had walked together, and I imagined nights when I would sit in that little room listening to the hum of family laughter upstairs, content to finally belong. The first months were peaceful. I cooked Sunday dinners, folded laundry, tended the small patch of garden behind the house. I thought I was building something. Memories, bonds, the invisible threads that hold a family close. I believed, perhaps foolishly, that gratitude would eventually bloom in Michael's heart the way it bloomed in mine. But cracks have a way of showing, even in houses built on love. One evening, as I carried groceries into the kitchen, I paused in the hallway when I heard voices. Michael's voice, low and urgent, drifting from the kitchen where he stood with his wife. "Just get her to sign everything," he said. "It'll be easier down the line. No confusion, no complications." I froze. My arms tightened around the grocery bags until the edges cut into my skin. His wife murmured something, too soft to hear, and Michael continued, "She trusts me. She always has. Just let me handle it." I stood there, unable to breathe. I wanted to step forward to ask what he meant, but instead I convinced myself I had misunderstood. I told myself he must be talking about something else, insurance forms, medical paperwork, anything but what my heart feared. I tiptoed back to my room and set the groceries down, my mind spinning. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house creaked in the dark, the way all houses do, but I couldn't shake his words. Just get her to sign everything. Was my son planning something I wasn't ready to see? Or was I, after all these years, finally too tired, too suspicious, inventing shadows where none existed? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to believe in him. The boy who once clung to my skirt when thunder shook the sky. The boy who swore he would never let me be alone. I told myself I was imagining things. But deep down, a whisper began to stir, faint and cold. Perhaps I wasn't imagining anything at all. The night I had been waiting for all week was supposed to be simple. A family dinner, the kind I once dreamed of when I worked 2 jobs and ate leftovers alone. I had pressed my best dress, a soft green one I hadn't worn in years, and pinned my hair up the way my late husband used to like. I wanted to look like I belonged, not just as a guest, but as the woman who had poured her entire life into building the roof above us. I set my shoes by the door, ready to go upstairs when the vibration of my phone jolted me. I picked it up, smiling, expecting a cheerful, "We're ready for you." Instead, the words on the screen cut through me like a sharpened blade. "You weren't invited. My wife doesn't want you there." For a moment, I thought I had read it wrong. My hands shook so badly that I had to blink 3 times, willing the letters to rearrange themselves into something else. Anything else. But the words didn't change. They sat there, glowing cold against the screen. And worse than the rejection itself, was the name at the top of the message. It wasn't from his wife. It was from Michael. My breath stopped in my throat. Not a call, not a knock on my door, not even the courtesy of an explanation in person. Just a text, as if I were an unwanted neighbor instead of his mother. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the dress pooling around me, and stared at the screen. All at once, memories came rushing back. The cashier receipts folded in my purse, the bank transfers marked mortgage support, the crumpled notes with lists of furniture I had paid for, a leather sofa, the stainless steel fridge, the washer that Michael said was too good of a deal to pass up. I had covered them all. The sting of the text grew sharper with every memory, not because of the money itself, but because every dollar carried a piece of me. The nights I went without heat so I could save, the medication I delayed buying because I told myself Michael's future mattered more than my comfort. Now, in one line of text, I was dismissed. Still, a part of me refused to believe. Maybe his wife had sent the words and Michael just pressed send. Maybe he had no choice. That fragile hope kept me from breaking entirely. But it didn't last. The next morning, I overheard them in the kitchen. His wife's voice was low, uncertain. "Do you think she'll be upset?" And then Michael, my son, the boy I once rocked through fevers, the teenager I cheered for at graduation, answered with a shrug in his tone. "She'll get over it. I told her it was your idea. Easier that way." The world tilted beneath me. It hadn't been her at all. It had been him. He had used her as a shield, a convenient excuse to cover the truth. He didn't want me there. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself, but it did nothing to stop the wave of nausea rising in my chest. I realized in that cruel moment that the text hadn't been a misunderstanding or a mistake. It had been a decision, a choice to cut me out. When Michael walked into my room that evening, his face was calm, almost rehearsed. He didn't apologize, didn't stumble over excuses. He just stood there, tall in the doorway, looking at me with a kind of detached authority that chilled me. "Don't make this harder, Mom," he said. His voice was low, but every word struck like a hammer. "I have my own family now. You have to understand that." I opened my mouth, but no words came. I wanted to ask him if 30 years of sacrifice counted for nothing. I wanted to remind him of every night I stayed awake to keep the lights on, every scar on my hands from cleaning and scrubbing. I wanted to scream that I had given him everything, and in return, he had reduced me to an inconvenience. But nothing left my lips, only silence. He waited, watching me, and then turned away as though the conversation was over. For him, perhaps it was. For me, it was the beginning of something I hadn't yet named. When he closed the door, I sat very still, the phone still heavy in my hand. The text was gone from the screen, but I didn't need to see it. The words had already carved themselves into me. "You weren't invited." It wasn't just about dinner, it was about life. It was about love. It was about a son who no longer saw his mother as family, but as a shadow best left in another room. The dress I had laid out still hung by the closet door. I didn't bother putting it away. I just let it hang there, a silent witness to what I had lost. I knew then, with a certainty that made my chest ache, that nothing between us would ever be the same again. That night, I didn't sleep. The words from Michael's mouth replayed over and over, echoing in the quiet of my small room. "Don't make this harder, Mom. I have my own family now," as though I were a burden, an obstacle, something to be managed instead of loved. I sat at my desk, the glow of my old laptop casting pale light across the walls. My chest felt hollow, but my hands moved with a determination I couldn't quite explain. I opened my email, scrolled through the folders, and there they were. Receipts, lines and lines of them. 174 payments in total. Mortgage transfers, credit card charges, invoices from home improvement stores, each one stamped with my name, proof that I had been the invisible foundation beneath Michael's life. My mouse hovered over the first one, a bank payment marked "Down Payment Carter Residence." I remembered that day. Michael had sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, whispering, "Mom, please, just this once. I'll pay you back when things get better." His voice cracked, and I had reached across, patting his hand, reassuring him I didn't need repayment. What mattered was his future. I clicked open the receipt, stared at the numbers, and felt tears sting my eyes. The next one was for the new refrigerator, the one with a water filter Michael insisted they needed. I had quietly canceled my doctor's appointment that month, skipping blood pressure medication to cover the cost. I remembered telling myself it was fine, that I could manage without pills for a while. Seeing it in writing again made my throat burn. Another receipt, this time for a sofa. Michael had come to me late at night saying his wife wanted the house to look presentable, and he couldn't bear to disappoint her. "Mom, you know how much it means to me, just this one thing." I had smiled weakly and said yes, even though it meant draining what little was left in my checking account. Each receipt was more than paper. It was a memory, a cut, a piece of flesh I had carved off myself and handed to him willingly. Now, scrolling through them one by one, I felt the weight of every sacrifice pressing down on me like stones. My hand trembled as I hovered over the delete button. Part of me wanted to keep them, to hold on to the proof of what I had given, as though they validated my existence. But another part of me, the part that had been wounded beyond recognition, knew I couldn't. Proof didn't matter. Proof wouldn't bring me respect or love or even a simple invitation to dinner. I pressed delete. The file vanished. Another receipt. Delete. Another. Delete. The rhythm became almost hypnotic. With each press, a tear slid down my cheek, but my hand never stopped moving. My chest ached, but there was also a strange release, like I was tearing away chains link by link. By the time I reached the last one, my eyes were swollen, my hands trembling so hard I could barely guide the mouse. When the final receipt disappeared, I sat back and wiped my face. The screen was blank. For years I had built Michael's home, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, and in a single night I erased it all. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. The house was quiet. Upstairs, I could hear faint footsteps, muffled laughter. Life continued as if I didn't exist. I leaned back and shut my eyes, and suddenly I saw him, not the man he was now, but the boy he had been. 7 years old, his cheeks streaked with tears after a bully pushed him down on the playground. He had run into my arms, clinging desperately, his voice breaking as he begged, "Don't ever leave me, Mom. Promise you won't." And I had promised. Now here we were, decades later. He had left me instead. A hollow sob escaped my lips. I pressed a hand over my chest, willing myself to breathe. The promise I had made to that little boy was still alive inside me, but the man he had become no longer needed it, or worse, he no longer wanted it. Morning light crept in through the curtains, sharp and unwelcoming. My body ached from the night at the desk, my head pounding from too many tears. I tried to gather myself, to focus on the day ahead, but the emptiness remained. Then, as if nothing had happened, Michael appeared in my doorway. His hair was neatly combed, his shirt freshly pressed, as though the world hadn't shifted at all. He leaned against the frame, casual, almost impatient. "Mom," he said, his voice steady, "did you send the payment for this month yet?" For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. The words sliced through me, sharper than the text message ever had. He wasn't asking if I was okay. He wasn't even pretending to care. To him, I wasn't a mother, a person, a heart that had broken silently through the night. I was a wallet, a line of credit with fading patience. I looked up at him, and for the first time, my face didn't crumble. My voice came out even, almost calm. "I'll check," I said. He nodded once, satisfied, and walked away. But inside, I knew. I had already made my decision. There would be no more payments, no more sacrifices unnoticed, no more giving until there was nothing left. He thought I was still his safety net. He thought I would never stop. But he was wrong. The days after that morning passed in a blur. I moved through the house like a ghost, folding laundry, scrubbing dishes, watering plants that weren't mine. Michael barely spoke to me unless it involved money. Each time I heard his voice, I braced myself, knowing the next sentence would begin with, "Mom, could you, or did you already send?" Nothing else. One afternoon, while sorting through the closet in my small room, I pulled out a dusty box I hadn't opened in decades. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid, the smell of old paper rising like a ghost of my younger self. Inside were letters, photographs, and at the bottom, a slim notebook with a cracked leather cover. My heart stumbled when I saw the handwriting on the first page. It was my own, written at 20 years old. The girl I used to be stared back at me through her words. "Someday I'll live for me." I traced the ink with my finger, remembering the fire I once carried. Back then, I had dreams beyond survival. I wanted to travel, to write, to dance in places where no one knew my name. But those dreams had been buried beneath bills, responsibilities, and the endless demands of motherhood. I closed my eyes, whispering aloud, "When did I forget you?" For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger or sorrow. I felt clarity. A weight lifted, not because Michael had changed, but because I finally saw the truth. I had given him everything, but I had given myself nothing. That evening, I walked to the park. The late summer sun slanted through the trees, casting golden light on the children running across the grass. Their laughter rose and fell with the wind, and I sat on a bench, letting the sound wrap around me. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, the rustle of leaves filling the silence I had carried for too long. For a fleeting moment, I was just Evelyn, Not a widow, not a mother, not a wallet. Just a woman sitting in the sun, feeling the air on her skin. Peace crept in. Quiet but undeniable. The spell broke later that week when a neighbor stopped me by the mailbox. Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman with silver hair, smiled as she adjusted her grocery bags. "Evelyn," she said warmly, "I heard Michael talking at the hardware store the other day. He was saying how proud he was of buying the house all by himself. What a responsible young man taking care of everything on his own." I froze, my smile faltering. "He said that?" "Oh, yes," she nodded, oblivious to the knife she had just planted in my chest. "He said it was all his hard work, such a blessing for his wife to have a man like him." Her voice faded as the blood roared in my ears. I managed to nod, to murmur some polite response, but inside I was unraveling. My son hadn't just forgotten me, he had erased me. That night, alone in my room, I laughed softly, a bitter sound that turned into tears. I remembered the day I signed away my father's land, remembered Michael's words. "Mom, you don't know what this means to us." And now, in his version of the story, I was nothing, invisible. The tears came hot and fast, but there was no rage this time, only a hollow ache. I sat at my desk staring at the shadows on the wall until I felt something inside me harden, like steel forming in a fire. I turned on my laptop, opened my bank account, and scrolled through the remaining balance. It wasn't much, not compared to what I had already given away, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, the thought crossed my mind. I could choose what to do with it. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Slowly, deliberately, I set up a new account under a name only I would know. With each click, my pulse steadied. I transferred the entire balance, watching the numbers vanish from one screen and appear in another. It felt like a secret, a rebellion, a breath of air after drowning too long. When the transfer was complete, I sat back, my hands still shaking. No one knew. Michael didn't know. His wife didn't know. This small act of claiming my own future belonged only to me. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile. Not because of Michael, not because of anyone else, but because of a promise written long ago by a girl with ink-stained hands. Someday, I'll live for me. That someday had just begun. The morning I left Michael's house, the sky was gray, heavy with the kind of clouds that promised rain. I packed my belongings quietly, 2 suitcases, a box of photographs, the leather journal I had rediscovered, and nothing else. I left behind the lace curtains I had sewn, the furniture I had polished, the garden I had tended. Those things belonged to the house, to Michael's story. They no longer belonged to me. I signed the lease for a small apartment overlooking a lake 2 towns away. The walls were plain, the floors creaked when I walked, but when I opened the window, the scent of water and pine drifted in, soft and steady. For the first time in years, the space felt mine. No one's expectations lingered in the air. No footsteps echoed overhead. Just silence, waiting to be filled. With the little savings I had secretly tucked away, I rented a tiny storefront on the corner of Main Street. The building was old, its brick chipped and windows smudged, but I saw what it could become. My hands had scrubbed offices and folded uniforms for decades. They could surely knead dough, measure sugar, and pour coffee for strangers. The first weeks were exhausting. I rose before dawn, mixing flour and butter until my arms ached, burning my fingers on trays that came out too hot. Some batches failed, collapsing into hard lumps or tasting too bitter. But slowly, carefully, the air began to fill with the smell of warm bread, cinnamon, and fresh coffee. Passers-by would pause at the door, drawn by the scent, and one by one they began to step inside. I called it Haven's Corner. I wanted it to feel like a refuge, a place where no one had to earn their welcome. And somehow, that's exactly what it became. At first, my customers were strangers, a bus driver on his morning route, a young teacher grading papers with a latte in hand. Then came women closer to my age, faces lined with stories. They lingered over coffee, hesitant at first, then opening up in low voices. One spoke of a daughter who had stopped visiting after marriage. Another whispered about a son who only called when he needed money. Their words spilled out, heavy with pain, and I listened. Sometimes I offered advice, but more often I simply poured another cup, letting the silence between us carry what they couldn't say. Before long, the shop wasn't just a bakery. It was a gathering place. Women who once sat alone at home now came together, sharing laughter, knitting scarves, trading recipes, and holding hands when the weight of abandonment grew too heavy. I had built more than a business. I had built a sanctuary. One afternoon, the shop was quiet, the rush of morning long gone. I sat at a table near the window, a cup of coffee warming my palms. Sunlight streamed through the glass, catching the steam as it curled upward. For the first time in years, I felt still. Not restless, not anxious, not waiting for Michael's approval or attention, just present, breathing, alive. I thought of the journal, of the words my younger self had written. Someday I'll live for me. And I realized, as I watched the light scatter across the wooden floor, that I had finally kept her promise. It was only later, when the evening news played quietly on the radio, that the past came knocking again. A reporter's voice rose above the static. In local news, a new bakery has quickly become a community favorite. Customers describe it as a small corner of healing, a place where people come not just for bread, but for comfort. We're also where the camera panned across my shop, showing the sign in the window, the rows of bread, even a quick glimpse of me behind the counter. My heart stumbled. I hadn't asked for attention, but there it was, broadcast across the county, and somewhere I knew Michael might be watching. The thought was confirmed the very next day. My phone lit up with a missed call, his number. I didn't answer. Hours later, I found myself standing in the back room, holding my breath as I listened to the voicemail. His voice was uneven, shaky, but he didn't say the words I had longed for all my life. Not "I'm sorry," not "I miss you." Just silence, a deep inhale, and then the line clicked dead. That night, as I closed the shop, I noticed something on the floor near the door. An envelope, plain and unmarked, slipped just beneath the threshold. My hands shook as I bent to pick it up. The handwriting across the front made my stomach drop. Michael's. Inside. A single page. The words were simple, rushed, almost desperate. "Mom, I was wrong. Please, let's talk." I sank into a chair, the letter trembling in my grip. For years, I had begged silently for recognition, for even the smallest shred of gratitude. Now, here it was, in black ink, delivered like a confession. But the question burned as fiercely as ever. Was it too late? The letter Michael left at my bakery stayed on my nightstand for weeks. Some nights I read it again, tracing the shaky handwriting as if it could explain his heart. But the words were hollow. They said, "I was wrong," and "Please, let's talk." Yet they carried no weight. They were words written out of need, not love. Deep down, I knew it. He hadn't discovered respect for me. He discovered desperation. Still, I tucked the letter away, letting time decide if it deserved an answer. Life moved on. Haven's Corner grew busier each day. Women brought their daughters, strangers lingered longer, and the smell of cinnamon and coffee became a kind of anthem for the quiet street. I found myself smiling easily, laughter bubbling up from places that had long been silent. My life was mine now, carved out not of sacrifice, but of choice. It was on a rainy Thursday that fate decided to intervene again. I had stopped at the local supermarket after closing the shop, a small list in my hand: flour, sugar, milk. My cart rattled across the linoleum floor, and I paused at the produce aisle, adjusting my scarf. That's when I saw him. Michael. He stood a few feet away, staring at a display of discounted bread. His clothes were rumpled, his hair unkempt. His shoulders sagged in a way I had never seen before, as if the weight of the world pressed down on him. For a long moment, I just watched. my breath caught between memory and reality. This was my son, yet he looked like a stranger. When he finally turned, our eyes met. The years of distance collapsed into that single gaze. His face crumpled, his lips parting as though words had been waiting there all along. His eyes glistened, wet and broken, and he whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." The sound tore through me, not like a wound, but like a song I had once longed to hear. I stood still, my cart between us, my heart aching with both love and sorrow. Part of me wanted to close the space, to reach out and cradle him as I had when he was small, whispering that everything would be all right. But another part of me, the part that had found her strength, remained steady. I stepped closer, just enough so he could see the truth in my eyes. I nodded slowly once, a gesture that held no anger, no vengeance, only recognition of what he had said and of what I could no longer give. He waited, hope flickering in his expression, as if that nod might lead to more, to forgiveness, to rescue, to the kind of mothering he had always taken for granted. But I stayed silent, because I knew what he really wanted. Not my forgiveness, not my presence. He wanted saving. Again. His debts, his burdens, the cracks in the life he had built without me, they had grown too heavy. He didn't see me as a mother. He saw me as a lifeline. And I couldn't be that anymore. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we would never say. His eyes pleaded, but my gaze stayed calm, firm. I loved him still. That kind of love doesn't vanish. But love no longer meant sacrifice. Love no longer meant erasing myself to keep him afloat. I placed a loaf of bread in my cart and turned away. The store's lights buzzed overhead, the hum of other shoppers rising and falling like background music. I walked steadily, pushing the cart through the aisles, each step grounding me in the life I had built. Behind me, I felt his eyes burning, but I didn't look back. When I reached the parking lot, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, the pavement glistening with puddles. I loaded my groceries into the trunk, the cool breeze tugging at my silver hair. For a moment, I tilted my head back, letting the wind brush against my face, my chest rising with a breath that felt entirely new. I whispered aloud, softly but surely, "At last, I'm living for me." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled into me, warm and unshakable, a truth I had claimed for myself. I climbed into the car, started the engine, and drove away, not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with peace. Some would have expected a reunion, a tearful embrace, a family stitched back together. But that was not the ending life gave me, and it wasn't the ending I wanted. What I carried instead was something stronger, the quiet victory of a woman who had been erased and who chose to write herself back into existence. And for me, that was enough.